This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Frontiersman Gear. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Frontiersman Gear, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back in the podcast studio for a great episode today, and it's an honor to welcome Kyle Kamp to the podcast. Kyle, real looking forward to our talk today and sort of doing the deep dive into nutrition and mountain health and something that I need to learn lots about. And I'm hoping today I can walk away some great tips that'll help me in my stone sheep hunt this next fall.
Oh, that's exciting. You've not said anything about that yet.
Well, we're a little bit blessed here in British Columbia in that we have pretty good opportunity, and typically I try and get out on a hunt every year for a mountain hunt of some sort, and usually it's stone sheep. And actually, I've been super remiss the last 2 years, but we've actually got dates, so we've got everything sort of set up. So I can't screw around anymore. So I'm hoping this is going to be a kickstart for me to sort of get back on track in terms of health and fitness, and certainly I've used the Mountain Tough program before, and sort of been slipped away here the last couple of years, just with some shifting priorities, which is not good. And so, I'm hoping today that I can pick up a bunch of stuff, and certainly on the nutrition side of things, that's such an important part. But I guess for our listeners, Kyle, if you want to kick things off and just, I know you work obviously with Mountain Tough Nutrition, and I know you also work with Valley to Peak Nutrition as well. So if you could just sort of talk about your background and sort of how you got into the nutrition side of things, and just learn a little bit about what you're doing personally in this space.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. Boy, how I got here is a very long road. That I'll shorten the story a bit by saying when I was in my early 20s, I lost 140 pounds, and that entire process and road endeavor really led to me wanting to know just more about the ins and outs of how nutrition worked. I mean, a lot of the changes that I made during that time period in my diet were not extreme, but I just saw these really dramatic results, which just made me want to keep diving in. So I was sort of at this fork in the road of my life where I was also going to go back to school, and because I didn't have any education, I realized I needed to do something career-wise, and just had this passion kind of converge. And so went to university in the Midwest, actually, and got my degree in dietetics. And after you get a degree in dietetics, to become a dietitian, you have to do supervised practice. And so most people don't know that you get placed somewhere. You don't really just get this option to choose. They kind of say, yeah, well, there's an opening out here. They're interested in you. At some point you've interested, or you have said that you've got an interest in being there. And they shipped me to Idaho. And at that point I'd had no experience in the mountains and hunting or anything like that. I didn't grow up doing it. So, by the time this had happened, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I thought Idaho was basically a death sentence. And little did I know in my time here, I fell in love with it. So that was almost 15 years ago. And then over that time, eventually found the mountains, and I found hunting and got involved with that. And we started working with folks who are interested in the same type of thing. So the tagline that we kind of use is we help people prepare for and perform optimally, which, comes prior to any hunts, comes during the hunt, and is just sort of multifaceted. And even since we've started our work, it ventures out into people who don't hunt. They just enjoy big adventures in the outdoors in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And it was a few years ago that I met the great folks at Mountain Tough after already being aware of their programming, and they were interested in doing some information on nutrition for their subscribers, and had asked if I might be interested in that. And so we started working. We built a couple of really, I think, maybe I'm biased, great programs on nutrition that live in the Mountain Tough app. And then we do coaching and one-on-one work with people outside of that through Valley to Peak. So it's been a very, very long but fun road to get to this point. And yeah, we love what we do.
That's super cool. Let's just touch on that personal journey a little bit of yours. And you talked about this massive weight loss, and I find it interesting that you talk about that it wasn't a huge change. It was like sort of these systematic, more smaller changes that did it for you. So maybe just talk a little bit about that personal journey and the motivation behind it. Sort of, I can't imagine. I'm looking at you, this perfect specimen. I can't imagine you weighing 140 pounds more or whatever that case was. So that blows me away to hear that. It's inspirational too, right?
Well, it must be the filter I have on the camera if this is a perfect specimen. But thank you. The motivation. I wish I could give credit to some one-liner or aha moment, but the reality is I was in my early 20s and weighed 270. I had all of these indicators from health professionals that I wasn't doing well, and those indicators at the time I didn't know anything about them, but they were my lab work and blood pressure, and you could imagine early 20s 270 at 5'6" doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize I probably wasn't on the path to living a very long life, and certainly not a high quality, or at least not what I would call high quality now. And the fact that I just love being outside and doing adventures. But I didn't know anything at the time. And at the time, like, nutrition wasn't popular and the internet wasn't a thing. And there wasn't this overabundance of information, which in hindsight was a tremendous blessing. I mean, who knows what I would have followed had those been available. So I just started doing things that made sense to me, like, having fruit instead of a slice of pizza for a snack, and realizing that every time I walked past the pantry or the fridge, I didn't need something to eat. So trying to identify, am I just wanting the taste of something, or am I really hungry? And trying to eat when hungry and not when I wasn't. And just those simple things, even going out to eat, rather than getting the fried chicken, I would get grilled. I might take one side of the bun off. I might not get fries, and instead I'd get a side of chili. And instead of getting a soft drink, I'd get a water. Just things that made sense to me. But for the first time, Kyle, like, the thing that I would identify that really changed it is I was consistent. Right. These things were not so big that I struggled to do them every day. It almost seemed like, what am I going to stop? Am I going to stop ordering fries and Frosties and dipping the fries in the Frosties? It wasn't serving me well to this point. It's not like I need to stop anything. And so I just developed this consistency and began to see, for the first time, really, because I'd certainly made attempts in the past, my weight start to go down. And at the same time, I was good friends with some people who were interested in exercise and, weightlifting and just being active. And so I started to incorporate some of that too, and really started to notice the impact there because I was consistent. And, over time, it just eventually led to me losing 140 pounds. And so, yeah, I am, looking back, I'm really grateful that there weren't all of these different things out there. There wasn't, low carb and high fat. There wasn't keto. There wasn't carnivore. There wasn't anything. It was just sensible things. And so, that is a lot of the lens that we educate through now, through that personal experience, is, look, it doesn't need to be crazy. It doesn't need to be something you hate, but it does need to be consistent. And so a lot of what you're doing and working with people is you're trying to help them figure out what that looks like and encourage them to be consistent in it. And like anything, because you asked about motivation, when you start to see some change, motivation comes easy, right? But it's that initial kickstart of seeing some progress, but doing it in a way that doesn't make them hate life, that lets them be consistent. And if they can start to see some progress, by then, my job is not motivating people. The motivation takes care of itself.
Interesting. I want to touch a little bit about your comment there about, too much information. There's so much now. You talked about low carb, keto, all the different sort of fab diets out there. Talk a little bit about, are you? And I find it like, I'm getting stuff on my feed, and there's just so much information. But these programs are like they're certified dietitians, and all this research and information's gone into it, and they're it's obviously clickbait designed to sell a program. I get that, but maybe talk about the simplicity of it, and maybe why people don't want those programs, why they don't want a keto diet or the caveman diet or whatever the case may be. Talk a little bit about, I guess, the simplicity and why why your philosophy is working.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will caveat or preface my answer by saying there are a lot of people that those things work for. And at the end of the day, I don't care what you do if it works for you. That is 99% of the battle, is just figuring out what you like. Now, to answer the heart of your question, is that what we find, and I would say that you find this both in history and looking back at other diets that have come up like this. I mean, Atkins or anything, right? Insert any fad diet that's happened over the years. What we have found in working with people and having these conversations with people, and even what we have found in big research studies for maybe people that feel like those matter and carry some weight, is those diets that are really limiting in terms of food selection tend to be really hard for people to do with any regularity and for any length of time. And a big reason why that is because you do not live in a bubble. If it's just you and you have no kids, you have no spouse, you have no social life, you can probably pull it off, because you have no one inviting you to go to dinner. Your kids don't want pizza night with their parents. There are all of these other things, though, where people want what I've found, two things. They want flexibility and they want autonomy. They want to be able to, not eat the entire pizza every night of the week, but they really would love to take their kid to pizza and not be in the corner eating a salad with the buffet cottage cheese on top of it or whatever, or take their kids to donuts after they get an A on their report card or whatever. And look, you can say that those things are bad, but the reality is that those things also are things that kids like. And so people are looking for flexibility and they're looking for autonomy. And the thing that we teach them is exactly the approach that I'm talking to you about, which is, look, you can't stop at the gas station and get 4 donuts every day and a Diet Coke every day, which is what I did whenever I was 270 pounds. But there certainly is nothing to say that by stopping and having a donut with your kid on the quarter at the end of a semester one time and still getting a donut is going to completely now sabotage all progress you've ever made and put you in poor health. Because the reality is that day and those meals are surrounded by days of really great choices too. And so, like, a phrase that we use all the time is, in reality, there's nothing that's good in nutrition. There's nothing that's bad in nutrition. It's doses. It's the dose that makes the poison. And we sort of live in this culture where whole categories of things are, qualified as good, whole categories of things that are qualified as bad, and people generally don't want the only good and they want only the bad. So if you can figure out how to give people flexibility and be intentional with their choices, and you can give them, that ultimately leads to them having autonomy. That's what everybody wants, right? They want to be able to navigate and figure things out on their own without someone telling them what to do. And so, that's the goal. Our goal is to educate people, to allow them to make decisions on their own, rather than us saying, here's what you need to do. Here's what you've got to do. You can't have that. Don't ever think about that. Don't you ever look at that again. Kiss that goodbye. And usually those things are people that, things that people don't want to kiss goodbye. And so if you can teach them how and why nutrition works, it will create flexibility. And if they have that, they'll feel like they've got autonomy. And if you can do that, they'll be consistent. And that's the key. You have to find something that you can do 6 days from now, 6 months from now, 6 years from now, because without it, you'll find yourself like I was, which was every couple months trying something new and not being able to adhere to it because it's too whatever it is that you didn't fit your life. and you'll just go back to old habits. Habits are habits because they're easy to do, right? So if you come up against a wall, it's going to be really difficult to not to go back to what's easy for your brain to do, which is old habits.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about kind of two groups of people. Let's talk about there's people that are sort of probably partially mountain ready. They're just generally in fairly good health, and but they're improving, and they're maybe planning a mountain hunt, and they're trying to get there. But that's the person I want to talk about next. But the person I want to talk about first is somebody that's a little bit sedentary, not in the greatest shape, and they're overweight, but they have this desire to get on the mountain. They've got a trip planned, but they're pretty poor health. Sort of, where do they start? What are some of the basics? And like that, there's obvious parts to that, but where does someone like that? Where do they need to start? And I want to learn some of those skills and traits that you're looking for. Do they need to be on the scale every day? Do they need to be counting calories? Do they need to have a notebook with them when they go out? Just somebody that's really trying to knock off a handful of pounds so that they can get back on the mountain and have a successful hunt.
The very first thing that I would say is they need to be and think about being and how to be intentional with their intake, right? And what I mean by that is, like, a very simple rule of thumb is to establish some sort of let's call it an eating system in the day. And that sounds more complicated than it is. In reality, it looks like this. You have a breakfast, you have a lunch, you have a dinner. Outside of those time frames, you're not randomly grabbing stuff. You're not drinking your calories. You're not, just walking by the boss's desk and grabbing some fun-sized candy bars from October until January 1 when those seem to be everywhere, right? There's an intention behind what you are doing. Now, going back to an interesting thing that you had said there is, do they need to track calories? The ability for a person to track their calories and what they eat can definitely move the needle, right? Because it is a numbers game at the end of the day. But if the idea of that seems so arduous to a person that they can't be consistent, you then want to lean on habits. So I would say, yeah, that can be really effective, and it can also create a very high degree of awareness. Like a comment that we get whenever we use tracking as a strategy to help people is, I had no idea. I was eating that much. I had no idea that many calories were in that. I had no idea I was eating it that often. It's just a very, very good opportunity to have an audit of your habits, and look back and see, well, what needs to change. Sometimes, like, we call that an audit phase in our program, because it does two things. Number one, it tells you exactly what's gone wrong. What do you need to change? It gives you some place to start, but it also tells you about your habits, things that you like. And some of those things should be a part of your program just to keep your sanity. So yeah, I think having some intentionality behind the structure in how you eat, or having an eating system. And then I think as a part of that eating system, making sure that there is plenty of protein at a part of each of those blocks that you have set up. Now, protein gets, all of the praise in the world of nutrition. It seems like everywhere you turn, someone's praising it, but no one, at least very few people, really talk about why. There's a couple of main reasons. Number one, protein is going to help you to retain any muscle that you do have when trying to get back on the mountain, when trying to train, and if you are trying to lose weight. That is important for obvious reasons. You don't want the weight loss you're observing to be muscle mass. You want it to be fat loss. You want it to be things that are actually meaningful and that you're targeting to lose. But number two, when you carry more muscle, you tend to have a higher metabolism at rest, and that will only serve to aid you in your efforts of training and or further weight loss to get you to where you're envisioning yourself before you go on this big hunt. The second thing that protein does, and maybe equally important, is it provides a higher satiety. And satiety is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but its simple meaning is it both fills you up at that meal and then provides a staying power until you're next. So you don't have these really high cravings to go get these snacks between meals and drinking your calories, etc., right? So you have a very even energy level throughout the course of the day, as opposed to having these big rises and these big falls. So if you have an intentional eating structure or system, and really what we're saying is don't have random calories outside of your main meals. Make sure there's some decent protein in there to help curb those cravings. And the third thing that I would throw in there is to try to factor in some movement, right? Like we've talked about Mountain Tough. So it could be the app, it could be a structured workout, but it could also simply start with you trying to target a certain number of steps per day, or to get up and go for a walk twice a day, even if it doesn't mean you hit this step count. But movement through the day in some fashion is definitely going to contribute to your goals, because movement is a big factor determining our health, our weight, our performance goals, etc. So trying to factor that in if you're already not moving can also impact. Now, I would say that is now at least begin for this person in this scenario that you're describing, that at least begins to scratch on the surface of getting them in the right direction. But there certainly are things that you could go deeper into.
Let's scratch that surface then. What is kind of so you've created this sort of this program. You're going to focus on, okay, you got my 3 meals, and you sort of you get that under control. What's going to be some of your greatest strengths moving forward? Is it going to be tracking calories, and do we use a digital tracker? Do we have some sort of tracking software on our phone? And then also, how important in terms of state of mind and progress is a daily weigh-in or a regular weigh-in? What are some of the factors that are going to sort of improve the success moving forward? And does somebody need to come and see someone like yourself and get on a program that is going to help them along, or is this something that somebody can? You did it, like you obviously clearly a motivated individual and passionate about it too. Once you sort of found a niche for it, so what's going to the best chance of success for somebody that wants to really move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the tracking for several different reasons, right? When a person begins, any change in habits that is different from what they have been doing over the past 6 months or 6 years is going to bring some positive change, right? If you go from eating a double quarter pounder to a single quarter pounder, and you do that enough, you will see some change, because it is less, it is different. The thing that a tracker of your calories introduces, though, is it introduces an objective data, numerical value, right? So no longer, and I'd say like the biggest hangup that we see is people feeling like they're trying, but not seeing anything. And the tracker will clarify, where is that? Now, to go to your question that you asked at the end there, which is, does a person need to hire someone like me or a coach or whatever? And I'd say that depends on a lot of variables, but one of those being this: if you are beating your head against a wall trying to figure out, trying to make change, but seeing nothing happen, or maybe you're seeing something happen, but you realize, look, I can't keep doing this, there's no way. If you hire a coach or a person who is willing to teach you where and why you could be going wrong, that could save you a ton of time and a ton of headache, right? I mean, that is a one reason to hire a guide. I could go on a DIY hunt and I could try to figure out where my said species is and where they could be or won't be at a certain time of year, where they're at along a migration route, given the time. I could figure that out, or I could save myself a lot of time and headache if this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, hire a guide and really have them shorten that learning curve for me, so that he's not going to shoot my gun. I still have work to do. It's not the lazy man's way out, but they shorten that learning curve in a big way, right? So yeah, I am a fan of the tracker for those reasons. I'm also a fan of the tracker because it does create that opportunity for flexibility. So if we look at your logs, and let's say that you've got a 2,000 calorie budget per day, and you are for the most part eating 85% really good, decent quality foods, great protein intake that is, doing its job. but you want to budget 200 of those calories, 10% of your calories towards something fun with a date night on your wife on Friday, or something sweet, or something, whatever. That is there. It is objective data, and it will not hinder your progress. And so again, when you create that opportunity for someone, they go from feeling like, I can't do this, to this seems fairly feasible. And I would say that that's the comment that we get a lot is, I almost don't even feel like I'm doing anything different except for creating an awareness. And that's it. That's a real reason to do it. Something most people haven't experienced, to that point. Now, the other thing that it does is that for that person who's wanting to scratch below the surface, from person one, is it lets us get more detailed. Is there enough fuel for you to execute your training when you're trying to lose weight? People can lose weight. They usually feel terrible and have no energy. Well, why is that? Tracker can tell us. Are you getting enough protein to theoretically ensure that you're holding all of your muscle while you're doing all of this work? Are you doing all of the work only to be short on the nutrition to where you're shortcoming yourself in the outcomes? Well, I don't know. The tracker will tell us. It takes away all the ambiguity that usually comes with nutrition and make people say, I think I'm doing it right, but I don't know. So as you can tell, I'm a huge fan of the tracker. I think that the topic of measuring progress markers or key performance indicators, or whatever phrasing you want to put to it along the way, is interesting because this again is where you talked about the coaching thing. You always have to work with an individual, and the best answer I can always give will be prefaced with it depends, and it's going to be dependent on the individual. For some people, measuring weight can hinder their motivation, even if they're seeing it, right? It just becomes almost a ball and chain to them. For some people, that is the motivation when they start to see that. So yes, it can be helpful to figure out something you could measure. You could measure weight, and I want to come back to the topic of weight here in a minute. You could measure inches. You could take pictures. You could measure performance. Are you improving in the gym? If you're improving in the gym and we have your logs, it's very likely that you're seeing some fat loss, even if we're not measuring that with any sort of a frequency, right? Going back to the topic of weight, what I would not do is weigh yourself one time in the week, because your weight will fluctuate dramatically throughout the course of the week. It could be high, it could be low. So if you measure it every Monday morning, but every Sunday is church potluck, it will always be the highest it is on Monday morning. So when you get in on Monday morning and you measure it and it's like, oh, it's going up, this isn't working. But we've missed 6 days of potential progress. And now we're making changes suddenly and urgently because we think we're on the wrong path, when in reality, you could be on the right path and not need to change anything. So I'm a bigger fan of taking data points frequently and then averaging those data points and tracking a trend, while always remembering that if you are noticing your clothes fitting better, and you are noticing your inches dropping, and you are noticing your performance metrics going up, but you are seeing your weight going up, I am not freaking out because you are having a composition change. You're still losing body fat, even though you could be either building muscle mass or holding what it is that you've already got. So even if you're monitoring the scale, I would not be too trigger happy in adjusting my plan if it's not moving immediately. And what you are watching for if you do decide to watch your weight, you really want to target a 1 to 2 pound loss average over the course of your time. You may lose 0 on a given week, but that next week might be 3 pounds. So the average there is 1.5 pounds per week. So you want to track averages, and you want to track rate of loss over time, not on a given week, and keep that, because that 1 to 2 pound per week average, or what's that in kilos? Half a kilo to 1 kilo per week average is a good marker to say, okay, This isn't so aggressive that we need to worry about this person losing muscle. Meanwhile, it's not going to take them 7.5 years to reach their actual goal. It's fast enough that, it's going to keep them motivated and in it. So you really want to kind of watch that. Anything too aggressive always means there is a greater risk of muscle loss. So when you are trying to create a calorie deficit, because that's what's going to move the weight, regardless of the macro composition of the diet, that's first and foremost. It's not to say composition doesn't matter, but calories are the first indicator that we look at. You want the deficit to be small, not huge. You shouldn't be crazy hungry. You shouldn't be losing weight in droves every week. We don't want you losing muscle. We don't want you losing water. We don't want you losing nutrition. We want to target body fat. So you want to create very small deficits to keep that going.
So a couple things there. Someone starts off and they're like, okay, I'm on this program to lose X amount of pounds. Talk about, say, an average, say 180 pound or 200 pound individual, maybe carry an extra 20, 30 pounds over and above, for their body type. When you start looking at someone like that and cutting calories, what kind of numbers are you looking at? Obviously you're not looking at the 1,000 calorie type. There's got to be that balance there. So, how far can you, and I know every single individual is different. If you talk at a 120 pound person that's carrying an extra 10 pounds versus somebody that's 300 pounds, it's a big difference. I get that. But maybe just touch a little bit on, where you got to be really careful. I guess the main driver is that 1 to 2 pounds per week is really what's going to drive that for the individual.
Yep. So I would say you have two ways of looking at this. Number one, you can run an audit. Don't change anything. Don't try to impress yourself. If you're working with a coach, don't try to impress the coach. Just honestly track your food over the course of the week based on what sounds good to you. That's going to be a decent representation of what you normally get in. And if you track that, you are looking to just go below that. So let's say, for example, I'll use myself when I was 270. My average intake when I was 270 was somewhere north of 3,500 calories per day. When I began to lose weight, I ate 3,000 per day. Still way too much for a guy who's 5'6" in his early 20s, but it made the weight move because it was a significant of enough change from what I used to do. So that is one way to look at it, and probably the least painful way to look at it. Now, we also have some, target numbers, even within the program that we've built in the app. We give a target range of 10 to 13 calories per pound of body weight to create a deficit. And sometimes you're using your desired body weight, not your current body weight. Those are very loose numbers. The problem with using those, using myself as the example with 3,500 calories, is that number might have me going to 1,500. If I can see some progress at 3,000, that sounds a lot better to me than going to 1,500, right? And the other thing with this whole dynamic is it depends on a person's goal, because the process of weight loss is iterative. In other words, even though I lost some weight at 3,000, I didn't get to my goal weight by continuing to eat 3,000. There were iterations in there where I had to reevaluate and adjust down to 2,800 and then reevaluate again and go down to 2,500 and then reevaluate. So I had to reassess those things periodically to get to where I wanted to eventually be at. So that 10 to 13 based on targeted body weight is a comfortable place for a person to start. And then once they start, they shouldn't be shocked if there is some adjustment that's needed, either to increase. Maybe it's too high of a degree of a deficit and you need to adjust something in there. Maybe it's too low and you notice, man, I'm peeling weight off here faster than I probably should be. I don't want to do that. So you may increase it a little bit. But there again, that's where the tracker can come in helpful, because if you're not keeping record of your nutrition, how do you know if you're at 2,000? You don't. You're kind of like, well, I guess this is. I don't know, and it may not be. Meanwhile, you are psychologically invested in it so much to where you feel like you're changing your whole life seeing no progress, when in reality, the body could be saying, look, appreciate the effort here, but you're nowhere near your thought of 2000. So that's where the tracker can also be helpful, because as much as it can suck to keep track, and I realize that, right? It is foreign to people, and it can suck to do that for a minute. It also sucks to try and to not see what you want, you know? And so you are in a way kind of picking, which thing do you want? Which suck factor do you want? Do you want to, spend some time doing an audit and evaluating your nutrition, or do you want to spend some time just feeling like you're beating your head against a wall, trying to change your life, but seeing nothing happening and not knowing why?
Yeah. Awesome. A lot of great stuff there. Just one thing so if we look at sort of the individual we're talking about now, and we talked about like a keto friendly diet, for example, what's kind of your suggested approach in terms, are we looking for 3 squares a day? Are we looking for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Is that sort of the ideal scenario for you? Or do you feel like, the whole starving yourself after dinner until lunch the next day, like the 18-hour thing, or is a good approach sort of for just the average human? And I know everyone's a little bit different, but what's sort of your take on, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Is that a good thing? Should we be looking at that?
Yeah, it depends. And you're right. It depends on the person, but I will say this, and I'm glad that you came back to this. I think that, I mentioned 3 square meals, which we were on a podcast the other day, and the host said, well, do you not recommend snacking? And I said, I don't recommend snacking, but I recommend intentionality. So if I'll use myself as an example again, I would rather eat multiple times per day, smaller sizes, than to eat 3 larger sizes. The calories could be equal across the board in both of those scenarios, but I prefer just to eat all the time, whereas someone else may prefer just to have 3 meals or maybe 2. So when I say I don't prefer snacking, I prefer intentionality, I think a person could line themselves up with 3 squares, like you said, or it could potentially be 4. What I would say is this, though, too. If you decide to incorporate some snacks in between those meals, plan them out. And also don't fall into the trap of thinking that those need to be snack-like foods, little packages of peanuts and little almonds and little bitty things. When I eat over that 4 periods over the course of the day, it looks more like 4 meals, to the point of where people may say, like, how do you lose weight eating that much food? Because there is a calorie piece that matters. You should not be eating little bitty tiny plates. You should be eating large plates of food that are really filling and aren't necessarily really high in calories. Now, the fasting piece, the keto thing, the carnivore thing, all of those should not be a question of which of these work the best and which of these are the best. It should be a question of what can I adhere to best. If a person enjoys really large meals, they may find it better to not eat anything until lunch, and then to eat dinner with their family, and then to have nothing else the rest of the day. So, going back to our conversation on calories, if you think about a person who has a 2,000 calorie budget and he gets 1,000 calories twice a day, I mean, that's going to be fairly big, meal. Whereas I say, look, I'd rather have 400 calories 5 times per day than that. You can forget about me not eating between 8 and noon. I'm eating 2 or 3 times in that time period, but that's easier for me. Right. And that's the one thing that we have, just as a culture, lost perspective on, is there is no way right or wrong, more right or wrong than the other. It is very individual and very tailored to the person.
Okay. A lot of great stuff there. So let's sort of segue now to the person that's probably close to their optimum weight, but maybe they're not as fit as they want to be. Maybe their diet's not quite as good as they want to be. Maybe, probably could have some more muscle composition, and they're prepping for that big hunt. So, okay, they've got drawn for an Idaho bighorn tag next fall, and they know that, and they're prepping for that hunt. Let's talk a little bit about, what's going to set them up for success, and sort of, and I know Mountain Tough is all encompassing. You guys do the mind, body, spirit, all of it, health and fitness, the whole works. But let's sort of focus on the nutritional aspect of it on the run up to the hunt. So, how someone can get ready for that mountain hunt. And I think kind of more tailored to somebody that doesn't do them all the time. There's a lot of BC guys here. They're every fall, and they're kind of, they're attuned to it. They know what's expected, and they can pull it off. But somebody that's never been on the mountain, they're going to step off that float plane, and they're going to get crushed that first time. How do they prep over the next sort of, call it 8 months from now as they get ready for a fall hunt?
From a nutrition standpoint, or from
mainly nutrition, I think. We can touch on the other stuff too, but I think from a nutritional aspect, I'd love to hear on that if we could, Kyle.
Well, I think from a whole, what's important to remember is that the training and the nutrition go hand in hand, right? So your nutrition is going to give you the fuel to execute that training to the highest level. If you are involved with a training program that has a good protocol and is written well, and the person who wrote it knows what they're doing, it should progressively allow you to improve in your performance over the weeks leading into the hunt. What the nutrition does, though, is it provides the fuel for that progression to happen. It provides the protein to recover from that progression so that you can continue to train. And if you follow those things leading into the hunt, you'll be more than prepared for the hunt itself. The part that you should consider with the nutrition is there's a couple of key things. Number one, I would not go into that hunt having had been on a prolonged diet. I want to make sure that my nutrition stores are filled at least 2 weeks prior to leaving the hunt. So you need to do what we call periodize or phase or think about this before you ever leave, and to plan it almost in reverse order. If my hunt is at the end of August, that means I need to be out of any, if I'm trying to lose weight before the hunt, I need to be out of any diet by, August 8th, which means I need to think 8 to 12 to 16, however long I think it's going to take, weeks prior to August 8th to run this caloric deficit and get in the condition or weight that I think I need to be hunting at. Do it in reverse order and work up. Second biggest thing is, I would say this: whatever that protocol looks like in the weeks leading into, let's say, August 8th in this scenario, I would work very hard. I would use the tracker to make sure that there is a mixed composition of the different macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Each one of those macronutrients has a different responsibility in nutrition and performance and weight and all of those things, right? Ensuring that you can maximize your potential and get the most out of your training comes by virtue of making sure that you're getting a mix of those different macronutrients. Carbohydrates provide fuel, protein recovers the muscle, fat is involved with hormone transport and vitamin transport, right? So ensuring that you're getting a mix of those versus following any, dietary dogma or whatever, and not getting enough of those things will ensure that you can make the most out of your training so that when you do go on the hunt, you're ready to go.
So that's where you come in as a nutritionist. You're going to be able to provide, for me to go and, I'll do the deep dive on the internet and get lost in the first 30 seconds that I start looking. So trying to have that understanding. Does Mountain Tough, through their programming, I've seen the programming before, but they address those macros specifically, don't they? Because they do have diets that, or nutritional programs that are aligned with their programming as well as you run up to the hunt, right?
Yeah. So when we wrote, we have two different sort of flagship nutrition programs on there right now. We have three. One that is general nutrition. We have one that is specifically built around backcountry nutrition. And then we have one that is kind of like a 40-day challenge, and they're all three great. And the general nutrition that you would be using during this time leading into a hunt, for example, We do talk about the macros and the roles of the different macros and even give you some targets to aim for with the macros. But, again, going back to your question about like, well, when is it worth hiring a coach? I would say if you're not seeing the outcomes that I'm describing and you can't figure out where the problem is and why you're not, then it could be helpful to have someone come in and look at that, look at the data, look at the problems you're having, talk to you about why you're not seeing those outcomes. And then they need to supply some, a plan for you as to how do you fix that? What are some examples to do that? Like if you were to bring to me this problem that you were having and I said, oh, well, I can see where you're not getting enough protein. I then need to, a good nutrition consultant, dietitian, whatever, needs to then tell you, well, you're not getting enough protein. Here's how you fix it. Here's some examples of how you fix it. And here's why I would fix it, right? If that person just says, oh yeah, you're not getting enough protein, you should hopefully you find out before you hire them and find somebody else. They need to be, giving you an explanation as to why. They need to be sort of walking you through where are you not, how can you fix it, what are some suggestions, what are some examples of how to incorporate that back in, so that you can fix it, make the most out of that training.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked a little bit about sort of there's the training phase, and maybe you're trying to lose a bunch of weight, but let's kind of go with the assumption that your weight's in pretty good shape, but you're building for this hunt and you're doing all this training, and you got the nutritional aspect of it. What's your kind of balance of carbs, fat, and protein in that training phase? But then you said the last couple of weeks before you go on the mountain, you need to change that up a little bit. So I'm guessing you probably need a little bit more influence on the fat side of things and that sort of thing. Talk about that transition on, so here I'm on a program that's a pretty well-balanced diet as I lead up to it. But then my last month as I go into that hunt, what should I be concentrating on at that point?
Yeah. So going back to kind of the start of your questions there, the composition of the diet leading into that, number one, you should make sure you're getting sufficient protein, which is going to be based off of body weight, not percentage of total calories, right? So for the most part, you're aiming for about 1.7 grams per kilo of body weight for your protein intake. Now, the reason that you're targeting that is that is the point in which you are flipping the switch that cues building of the muscle. You could go over that if you wanted to, but it's not to necessarily suggest you're going to get better outcomes, right? So we want to make sure that base is covered. And if that base is covered, then you can start to look at the distribution of the other macros to make sure that you're not going over your calorie budget. From the carbohydrate side, it's really going to depend on personal preference. It's going to depend on volume of training. It's going to depend on intensity of training. And when you increase those things, volume of training, intensity of training, you want a larger percentage of your calories coming from carbs, because that's going to be the primary energy source for that type of training. So we're never just burning all fats or all proteins or all whatevers. This is a rabbit hole, so I won't go down it as far as the different scenarios there. But we do know that the higher the intensity of the training, the more volume of the training, the more the body's relying on carbohydrates as its primary fuel. It can use other fuel sources, hopefully never proteins. It can use fat, but the conversion from using the conversion of fuel, or the conversion of the food into fuel, happens faster when from carbohydrate than from protein, especially if the intensity is high. So you got a big range there that you can operate in. And I would say, just to be very subjective with it and say, you know what, do I feel like I am tiring out in the middle of training to where I can't get through the workout at the same level I started? If the answer there is yes, you need to add some carbs. If the answer is like, oh no, man, I've got, full 10 out of 10 power from start to end, you could be totally good. Now, transitioning into your question about, well, what does it look like in the 4 to 8 weeks prior to the actual hunt that I start to come out of this deficit? And I would say this again is where the tracker is helpful, because the first gap that you want to fill is any of those macros you could be short in. If you notice that you are significantly below your target fat calories, you want to add in fat. If you notice that you're significantly below your target protein or carbs, then you want to add protein and carbs respectively. If you are, I will say this, if you are feeling depleted, if you're feeling pretty drained, if you're struggling to recover, you almost always want to add in more calories from carbs more than anything else. That is usually going to be the macro that is the most depleted and most efficient. We tend to have a more favorable hormonal response whenever you increase from carbs as opposed to the other macros. So leading into that hunt, you want to make sure that those nutrition stores in the muscle are completely full so that when the activity starts, there is something there for the body to tap into and, stay to stay well fueled, not just on day 1 and 2, but a lot of these like sheep hunts are, they're 10 days at least by the time, because you're talking about once in a lifetime, you're talking about in some places going in pretty deep, a couple day hikes, worth getting in. That's 2 days then coming out. That means you've only got 6 days to fill the tag, and, rams aren't everywhere. So trying to find, a ram that is what you're after and doing that in the time frame, you want to feel as good or as close to as good as you did on day 1 by day 8, 9, and 10, if you can. And you want to stay on top of that nutrition while you're on the hunt.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Can we talk a little bit about nutrition on the hunt? So a lot of people put a lot of preparation and thought into, the size of, how many calories they're carrying, what it weighs, that sort of stuff, and sort of a bit, try and be more intentional on that. I've kind of got my standard kit for my, I put it in a Ziploc bag, and it's my 1.6 pounds, and it's got so many carbs, so many calories, so many so-and-so. How do you guys, and let's look at an example like primarily a backpack hunt as opposed to sort of where you got the camp kitchen and that sort of stuff. You're actually, you're hiking in with all your stuff on your back and going, what do you set yourself up with? Yeah,
it's nice if you got a base camp, right? You can just kind of eat luxurious and eat whatever you want, but you go back, if you're going in there, you have to think about a lot more. You have to think about the logistics of refrigeration and not like most proteins need refrigerated. How are you going to deal with that? You have to think about your calorie needs, but the fact that you've only got so much space in your pack to make up those calorie needs. And the greatest dichotomy, the greatest conflict that we find in people is how do I meet those demands with the right type of fuel in the limited space or opportunity that I've got? Because again, remember, if you are doing a lot of elevation change on a hunt, that's a fairly high intensity. It's going to be a fairly high requirement to carbohydrate, and carbohydrates are not the most calorie filled macro that we've got. Fats are. So I think that you need to, again, sort of plan ahead, number one. And then number two, you want to try to think about what ways can I get the most concentrated sources of nutrition into the backcountry? What are some of the most concentrated sources of carbohydrates? What are some of the most concentrated sources of fat that are not going to leak all over my pack? What are some of the most concentrated and convenient sources of protein that aren't going to require refrigeration? How can I use these things to strategically plan something out over a 10-day period of time? And what I have found in working with people is that in some cases, this is going to be far easier to accomplish if you consider some DIY stuff as opposed to all packaged things. So I'll use an example of a sheep hunt that I went on in Alaska last year where, I had to give some thought to this. So what I would do instead of, normally I would take oats with protein powder and some fruit in the mornings, but oats are not that calorie dense. So I switched to granola. Granola is usually made with honey. It's a higher concentration of carbohydrate without taking up more space in the pack, right? I mean, I could have thrown in 10 days of bagels, but I would have had no room for anything else. So that's an example of a concentrated source of carbohydrates. Within that breakfast, I also put in protein powder. That was 30 grams of protein, right out of the gate. And so that would be one thing that I would eat. Another thing that I really like to use is those packages of electrolyte powder. And I'll often prepackage a lot of my own, and I get the ones that have carbohydrate. Because if I'm trying to distribute my fuel over the course of the day, I can, most people think about eating, but I can also put it in a bottle and drink it, right? And that does not take up much room in my pack. It's no bigger than the size of a Post-it note, yet gives me ample fuel for 2 or 3 hours of hiking. There's not a lot of foods that are going to supply that kind of fuel if from the right source in that small of a package beyond that. So you have to kind of think about those things. So while I don't want to say, calories per ounce doesn't matter, it to some degree doesn't, because you are trying to practically plan more. Am I getting the right types of fuels in the right distribution over the day? That's going to prepare you and allow you to have more fuel than calories per ounce. And so I'm often thinking about what we categorize as two simple things is totals and timing. Am I getting in some fuel in enough of a portion size that's going to make a difference that I can feel the effect with enough frequency to where I never feel that wall? I never feel that bonk that people talk about. I don't have to stop and regain myself because I just feel so low. So I am really trying to stay on top of eating often and eating often enough so that I never feel like this massive drain. And if you're staying on top of that, you are going to be putting yourself in a pretty good position to still feel really great by day 8, 9, and 10, as opposed to getting to day 8, 9, and 10. You see a band of Rams, but you're like, I don't have it. I do not have it in me to go up there, go down there, go over there, go anywhere other than right here, because I just feel so depleted from the days leading up to this point.
Yeah, that's one thing I know on our hunts, we've talked lots about it, is managing that energy and having enough food. You're like, okay, yeah, you look at, we do 14-day trips, and it's like, okay, if you do 2 pounds a day of food, and I know that's not a great marker in terms of nutrition and calories and everything, but in terms of just your pack weight, and you've got 14 days worth of food, that's 28 pounds of food you're carrying around and nutritional value. So, and so some people are like, well, I can carve down, I can do 1.2, 1.3 pounds a day, and then they have zero energy, and then the Rams are there and you can't get to them anyway. And it's like, there's that delicate balance. Just out of curiosity, you brought up a point, and I was, you talked about that electrolyte, carb fueling electrolyte. What's a sample product of that comes to mind? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be like you had Gatorade, right? And that was it.
Yeah.
And then there were products that came where it's like, there's some that are mega electrolyte, no fuel, and then some that are a balance of both. And there's all these different ones. I am not, I am not paid, supported, affiliated with any product, but one that I like is Tailwind. And Tailwind is one that tends to supply a little more than average on the electrolyte side, which sometimes is really needed in August type of hunts where you're sweating a lot, but also supplies good calories. Now, a sort of nerdy look at what Tailwind offers that some other products don't, and I'll come back to that statement in a minute, is they offer multiple different types of carbohydrate in the product itself. It's not all sugar. And the reason that that's important is it can be easier for the stomach to process when you have multiple different sources from carbohydrate versus just one. And there are others that have come out since then, like Scratch Labs comes to mind. There's a variety of different ones, but I mean, we have used with people. I have a good friend, but someone we've also worked with who we do a lot of death hikes every year with the Exo Mountain group. They're good friends of ours, and one of them was having some issues with some fueling and said, look, if this stuff sits that well with you, just drink it. set some alarms, drink it periodically. He did, and he was having problems digesting food. He'd throw up all the time. So as you could imagine, you keep trying to put on miles, and there's just no more gas in the tank if you're doing that. And so what I recommended to him was Tang, the orange Kool-Aid drink that's got calories and carbs in it, and that's what he did. That fueled his entire death hike. And so he went from being unable to, he would still finish him. He'd gut him out. He's a pretty awesome guy, but he didn't have much in him by the time he finished, right? To now being able to do them at a pretty high level because he found something that worked. And my point in saying all of that is you can spend the money on the bougie expensive stuff, but you can also buy this over-the-counter stuff that costs next to nothing, and you're still going to get the same outcome. But again, you're talking about individual tolerances. Tang set great with him. Other people, it might not. You might need that multiple source carbohydrate type of a drink that's offered by Tailwind. I use Gatorade. I just buy over-the-counter lemon lime, like I played T-ball with Gatorade because I like it and it does the job for me. So, I use Tailwind too, but I'm just looking for a product that does the job. And thinking about death hikes, I've used instant mashed potatoes in place of these too. I'll just mix them with room temperature water and mix them in a baggie, almost triple most electrolyte products, same great carbohydrate source, process is easy in the stomach. I like that taste of mashed potatoes instead of the sweetness of an electrolyte fruity drink. And so sometimes that sits better with me. There are so many different, variables and tips and tricks that you can use to supply fuel to yourself. And I'd say that it's a lot less perfection than most people probably think.
Interesting. How critical are the electrolytes? How is it critical that you have that in your bag on a multi-day hunt, like call it 7 to 10 days? Do you need it?
It is only as critical as you are losing them, right? So
right.
If you are losing them a lot, it now becomes very critical. But I'll also remind you that some of those are just in food. So if you are like take sodium, for example, that's the most prominent electrolyte lost in sweat, one of the most prominent electrolytes tied to cramping, but also one of the easiest electrolytes to get from a non-electrolyte product. So it really depends on your losses. It depends on the environment because that's going to be indicative of the losses if you're sweating a lot. It depends on how much you're moving and water you're drinking. So if you're moving a lot, sweating a lot, drinking a lot of water, peeing, it's essential. You need something there to replace those losses from the urine and the sweat and breathing, right? If it's a high altitude and it is high exertion and you're breathing a lot, you are losing water through breath. And so those are all factors that you've got to play into when trying to decide, whether or not you should take one. Now, I will say this, sheep hunting in particular is pretty intense. It's pretty long. There are a lot of variables. It can be hot. You talk about, desert sheep in Idaho and stuff like that can be hot that time of year. You're sweating a lot. I would say you're pretty safe to just bank on bringing something, as opposed to, there's elk units here in late season that are 90% on the road and you're in a side-by-side looking for bulls. I don't need electrolytes on a hunt like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure too, it's like, I think of my hunting partner and he's in incredible shape, but there's very little water intake and he doesn't sweat a ton. And I'm exactly the opposite. I'm like drinking triple what he drinks. And so I'm sure my electrolyte intake requirement is a lot higher than his in that scenario. But
yeah. Yeah, and there's even factors like knowing yourself, and do you lose a lot of sweat? Do you lose a lot of electrolytes and salt in your sweat that you've seen through training? And an easy way to assess that is, do you notice salt rings in your hat? Do you notice salt rings around the brim of your shirt where your sweat was? Do you notice a big salt circle around where the lumbar pad of your pack was when you've been doing some weighted training hikes. And if you see that, that's a fairly good indication that you are losing a fair amount of electrolytes in your sweat, and that just to cover your basis, it would be good to bring some sort of an electrolyte product with you on the hunt.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, let's touch a little bit. And oh my goodness, like I can't believe we've blown through an hour here. There's just so much to touch on, and so we're doing this again, just for the record, I hope. But
I'd love to.
We touched a little bit on it off air, but about supplements, creatine, protein powder. What sort of enhancement during the training process? Maybe even the weight loss side of things. Should people be taking protein and taking creatine if they're trying to lose weight? And then obviously when they're building muscle, how much more important is that? Should they have creatine with them on the hunt? Just the supplement side of things and the enhancement side.
Yeah. So I'd say, casting the net broadly over supplements, you need to factor in two things. Supplements become worth having when you can't get enough of something from your normal intake, or your needs are so high that they couldn't be met with food otherwise. I will say that if a person is not detailed in on their nutrition, there is no supplement that is going to take them from 0 to 100, like having really great nutrition. Calorie target that matters to you. Your protein intake is exactly where it needs to be. You're getting a good carbohydrate intake based on training. Quality's good, distribution over the days, all of those little details. And at that point, if you're looking for more, supplementation can be helpful. Or if your needs are so high that they can't be met through food, supplementation can be helpful. Based on that, a person may need no supplements, zero, right? I mean, we go back to the protein threshold that I talked about earlier. If you are meeting that through food, more like the phrase that we always say is, a boiling pot left on the stove doesn't get more boiled the longer it sits there. It's already boiling. The goal has been achieved, right? The saturation point is there. So more, unless it's just something you enjoy, does not necessarily mean a better outcome for you, right? Now, the creatine one is interesting because it seems like it's become the absolute most praised supplement probably since whey protein, started to become popular, however many years ago that was. I'd say there's a few things to remember on creatine. So number one, creatine can be obtained through diet to a point, right? It's going to be difficult to extend beyond a certain point, but it can be obtained through a point. The greatest the greatest effect that we see in creatine is in mostly short burst activity. If you're doing a lot of weight training, if you're doing a lot of high intensity workouts, if you're doing a lot of sprinting, if you're doing a lot of those things, then we tend to see that people taking creatine supplements that can help with, but it may not help with endurance. We know that creatine is probably the most researched supplement since whey protein, and we really have not seen any negative outcomes from it. So what I would say is you should try it, right? If you're curious about it, we don't really see any negative side effects other than it can bother people's stomach if they take too large of a dose, and you tend to see some weight gain because you draw in water into the muscle. Now, again, with that said, I don't know that you see any... I think the question you're always asking yourself with all supplements is, do I know why I should be taking this? Like why does, do I know what this is supposed to be doing? Am I feeling that, or is it theory? And at that point, if I'm not feeling it, if I'm not feeling like a complete difference that I can tie to that, do I need to keep taking it, right? And if the answer to that is no, you really got to ask yourself if you should keep taking it or not. Now, even if science, research, even if I say, oh, well, there's no research that says that that's actually helpful, but you say, I notice a significant difference in the way that I feel, in the way that I perform, in the way that I recover, regardless of what you say, then my comment to you is, then you should keep taking it regardless of what I say. If you notice a difference, right? And so if there is a product like creatine or protein, etc., that you've been curious about and has been deemed safe, the only way that you're going to know is if it's beneficial to you is for you to try. If you try and you don't notice that it is this life-altering experience, then you have to reconcile whether or not you want to keep investing your money into it. But I, again, may be biased just in my profession. I have seen nothing take effect like a person dialing in their nutrition like I do. I've seen no supplement take effect like someone dialing in their nutrition and really detailing down what their personal needs are, getting good rest, having a good training program, those basic fundamentals. Like we say master the basics, do them with relentless consistency. And I would pretty much guarantee that will take you further than you've ever gone.
Man, so much good stuff there. Yeah, really, really inspiring. And the one thing I keep coming back to that I've noticed is just consistency in what works for you, right? It's, there's no one size fits all. There's no elixir. It's all just like what works for you and being consistent with that.
100%. I mean, we say all the time, I'd rather be consistently good than occasionally great. And you could do great things a couple of times, but I would rather a person have the minimal effective dose all the time than doing a couple great things every now and then, because that person, even though words like minimum are involved in that statement, that person will see more than the person who's swinging for the fences every now and then. You in all of this, you have to. What's so unique about our culture right now is anyone, anywhere with the phone can broadcast what they do with any opinion, right? And so there's all of this more is better and pound yourself and you should be, all of these like things that elicit this idea of maximum and more and more and more. And the trouble with that is that that's not always true. And sometimes less is better if you can do it consistently, right? So yes, you want to challenge yourself. Yes, you want to do all of those things, but you have got to find something that works for you, because that dramatically increases the likelihood you're going to be able to keep doing it. And to keep doing something, to be consistent, is really where the results are.
Yeah. Awesome. What are we missing? What haven't we? I know there's so much we've just like literally not even scratched the surface really. But anything else I want to talk about is when we get to see you next. So there's a couple things. They're going to be in Sheep Week, and you're going to be. I know Mountain Tough's sponsoring Tough Sheep, and has a huge presence in the sheep show. And I think you're going to have a booth down there. Is that correct? Is it going to be through Mountain Tough, or is it going to be through your other side of the business?
Yeah, I will be down there with Mountain Tough, so I'll be helping with Tough Sheep and anything that those guys need to support them. Obviously, we have the coaching arm as well through Valley to Peak, and I'd be happy to meet and chat with anybody if you have questions. I love stuff like that, and so yeah, we'll be down at Sheep Week, and I'd be more than happy to join you on here at any other time that you want to, and I appreciate you having me this time too.
We're going to take you up on it. This is so inspiring, and it's really cool to hear. And it is quite daunting, right? And to hear that, there's things that you can do that are not, you don't need to move mountains to make a significant difference, and that's really inspiring, I think, for a lot of people. And as we know, nutrition is such, like, obviously it's holistic. You need to do all of them, everything. Like, you can't have a great diet and not do any exercise and expect, to go out and crush your hunt. But on the same token, you don't, the nutrition is such an important aspect of this, right? So, yeah. One thing I want to do is we have our Sleuths Conservation Mountain Hunting Expo. We host that every year in southern British Columbia. It's not too far from Idaho, actually. And I would love for you to come and do a seminar for us. Come up to BC, and we're all booked out for 2026. Our show's in February, so we've got our lineup there. But I would love to try and get you up there. And we always are off the big shows. We don't ever want to compete with Sheep Show or anything like that. But if we could get you up to our show, this would be such a well-received segment. And we've never really done anything proper on the nutrition side. And I'd love to have you come up and talk to our attendees at the show.
I'm in. I'll do it. I'd love to.
Awesome. Very cool. So if people want to learn more, if they want to upgrade their game, let's send them to where they need to go. Where do they need to sign up? Where do they need to learn more about what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone already subscribes to the Mountain Tough app, there's already several programs in there that you can check out. Those are included in there. There's tons of resources and guides that we've built, etc. It's all housed in the app. You can also check out Valley to Peak Nutrition, which is our other arm too, our personal side of things for... Man, we have so many different things. We have our own podcast where we do Q&As and answer questions from our listeners. And there are guides and resources that we have built that range from completely free to $5 to $10. And then we have, self-guided courses on there that you can take. So yeah, I mean, my goal when we started this was I want to be a reliable, trusted source of nutrition, and I want to have good information for people to take that they feel like they can be confident in. And so over the years, we have tried to do that in every way, shape, form, and fashion for people who, that are interested in doing it. So that's v2pnutrition.com. And then also, obviously, the Mountain Tough stuff.
Awesome. Well, we'll put some links in the show notes and stuff like that. And then for Mountain Tough, obviously they've sponsored this podcast in the past and done a great job. And programming's phenomenal over there too. And as little as regular price is $29.99 per month and $240 a year. So really affordable. And the cool thing with the Mountain Tough programming is it's all encompassing. There's you guys have really built out a great platform. There's the spiritual side, the mental side, the health side, the physical side, the nutrition side. It's all encompassing, right? So it's just a better way to live your life, really, from what I can tell. And I'd like to hear your perspective on that, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I am grateful and very humble to have been brought in on what Dustin developed so many years ago. And, he's done a great job building a team around there with the exact same focus. And, this is going to sound so cliche, so I almost don't want to say it, but I almost don't feel like I'm giving credit where it's due if I don't. And, from the moment that I've walked in to now, they are family. And one of the reasons I also just appreciate them so much is they are unashamed about what they stand for. And I think that is so needed right now for so many people. And we sort of went through this time where that wasn't really talked about and was kind of shied away from. And it wasn't cool to be a tough guy who liked to hunt, but also kind of loved, faith and talked about our spirituality. And that's sort of being shattered down. I think that they're leading the way. So yeah, they do a fantastic job about... Obviously, the training is great. Hopefully, I've met expectations on the nutrition side. They've covered the spiritual side. There's so many different resources in there. And, it's going to also sound like of course, I would say this with my work with them, but I can't think of a better investment than $29 a month for, all of these different areas in your life. They just ran a Black Friday deal where it was, if you signed up in a certain amount of time, I think that it's over now, but it averaged out to 26 cents a day. I was like, God, I waste more money on that than stuff I'll never see again, much less something that actually, really has a tangible benefit in my life. So yeah, I almost feel like I shouldn't be, I'm the least likely person to be involved, but so grateful and humbled to be part of a great program.
Yeah, you're in a safe space here for sure, and they're no longer a podcast sponsor, and I will say that 100% that the programming is exceptional. They are a family. Dustin, Weston, and the team over there are just phenomenal people. You walk into that space over at the lab, and it's just a safe, inclusive place, and it just feels good being in there, and good people doing good things, and they stand for values that certainly I align with that are really important to me. So, Great company, great organization. And I agree, like there's so many things. If you take one thing away from they offer, you're stealing it effectively, and there's just something for every part of your life. I love Dustin's talk about being a good dad, being a good father, being a good husband, like just so many different things, just inspiring all the way around. So hats off to you and the entire team over there at Mountain Tough.
Yeah, you bring a good point up, and I'll throw this in. This is just a side tangent based on what you said, but I'm in a very, and you may be too, I'm in a very unique boat in that I get to have pretty private conversations with people. And the interesting thing about all these private conversations that I've had with people over the years is that we are all under the idea that the struggle that we've got is ours. And what's wrong with me? Why can't I get it right? Why can't I? And I am in the unique boat to know we all have the same problem. We're all not getting it right. We're all feeling this way. And I would say that if you can find a group of people that are willing to share like that and willing to be open about it, like even the guys at Mountain Tough, that's like, it's cliche and you've probably heard this before, but there is a feel when you are in and with other people who think like you and who are suffering through hard workouts with you, suffering on hunts with you, that just makes you want to be the best version of yourself, dad, husband, believer, whatever that is. It's contagious. If you don't have that, make it or find it. And it is definitely a catalyst in all that we have just talked about. It makes this easier than going at it solo, for sure. So
awesome. Those are incredible words of wisdom, and yeah, 100% agree. No, I really appreciate the time you took to speak with us today, Kyle. And we got to do this again soon because there's just so much great stuff. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of us in the mountains can improve on is our nutrition. A lot of people focus really heavily on the fitness side of things, but maybe not so focused on the nutritional side. And then certainly on the hunt itself. Like I know there's just so much information out there, and a lot of it's bogus too, right? So, that's what you guys do. You guys get up every day and you think about mountain hunting, you think about nutrition in the mountains. That's what you do. That's your day job. Like to me, you're the guy that we need to talk to. We need to, not some influencer that thinks they have it all figured out and, spent 2 minutes in a classroom and has no, maybe doesn't even have that much experience, but they look good on camera and they talk well. So let's listen to those people, right? So, I love it. Love what you do. Love what we talked about today. And like I said, it's just so little in such an important area, but look forward to having more dialogue with you on it. So
thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me on.